Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Mark Wallace here for another special edition of the People Show right here live on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And joining me in just a couple of minutes is going to be the retired clerk of Cook County. That is my friend David Orr, who's going to be joining us for this conversation as we are continuing to educate, inform, and hopefully inspire you to go to the polls to make a different selection from what we have happening now at the Board of Review. We have learned some astonishing, nothing short of astonishing um, revelations about what's been going on for decades at the Board of Review that is nothing short of stealing from the poor and giving to the wealthy. That's what's been going on. And a purveyor of that is two of the current board of review commissioners is Larry Rogers Jr. and George Cardenas. Larry Rogers Jr.'s office or commissioner's ship is the only one that is up for election this time around on March 19th. March 19th is the day, not November 5th, for our local elections. Our local elections here in Chicago and Cook County in the state of Illinois are largely determined at the in the primary vote. In the primary vote here in the spring, that is the vote that is largely determined the vote for for our local elections. Most of most of us are impacted by what happens locally and statewide, and we can impact what happens locally and statewide by our involvement. And so what the People Show is all about, it is about providing you with the facts and then our opinions about who it is that we think that are best representative of our communities, who we could support and hold to account. But in this conversation, I want to acutely focus on what's happening at the Board of Review, because you have to understand and you have to know what is going on and and how our communities have been impacted by that. And so joining me now is the retired Cook County Clerk, David Orr, who is joining me live on the program. David, welcome back to the program.
Well, good to see you, Mark.
It's good to see you. David, these are some astonishing revelations. I've been in real estate now more than 40 years, about 42 years of my life. And I consider myself to be a pretty decent practitioner of real estate. And I've been involved with politics for a long time, since 1985. All right. Here in Chicago, and really engaged in the last 20 years or so. But I, like many other people, have paid very little attention to the Board of Review, if any attention at all. Right? We just know that they had some people there and some commissioners there, and we just didn't think, okay, it's an office, somebody we know, that's who we'll vote for. Well, over the last several years, thanks to Fritz Kagi and people like that making us aware of what's been happening in that office for decades, and of recent becoming even more informed about what's been happening at that office, that it is a very powerful office, and it has been doing a great disservice to a great number of homeowners in the city of Chicago on the behalf of a preferential few. And we need to make sure that we do all that we can to help people to understand in as elementary language as possible that we have to make a change in the administration at the Board of Review.
Well, I agree with that 100%. And the good news is, politics is the art of managing conflict, and it can be rough sometimes, as we all know. We want to see so many positive things happen, always. But the thing about this particular race, in this buried thing called the border review, that's kind of a stealth operation, is that we have a chance to have a dramatic change. We could change this. The way people are getting ripped off, average homeowners are paying more in taxes than they should be because of the insiders, the Madigans and the Burks and the Berrioses. And unfortunately, I have to put the name Larry Rogers in there of what they've been doing over these years. People don't know about it. But when I say this is unique, there's only 3 board of commissioners. And now there's 1 reformer. Okay. For years and years, there was no reformers. It was just all Berrios at the assessor's office, and these board of commissioners had a great little conspiracy going. But a couple of years ago, a reformer named Samantha Steele, who was on your show recently, was elected and upset the apple cart. And so if Larisha Tucker, who was the reformer in this race running against Larry Rogers Jr., if Larisha would win, they would have 2 to 3 votes. We could stop all this stuff of giving Trump millions of dollars of tax breaks, and we could go through, many of this over and over again. So what happens when they give these powerful folks downtown big assessment changes? Okay, they lower the assessment like they just did for the Bears. Okay, they lower the assessment, which means they don't have to pay as many taxes. Now, but let's say they don't pay $10 or $15 million less in taxes. You know what that happens when that goes to every little homeowner around the whole county? Well, that adds you up, and the estimates are that average people are paying $700 more a year, and sometimes up to $1,000 more in their taxes than they should be if it weren't for these special deals. And again, I don't want to pick on anybody too much, but if I hadn't studied this a lot, partly even when I was county clerk before, because we had a tax department too. But anyway, the interesting thing about this is we can debate the candidates and the ideas, but the voters could totally change this. You can't usually do that. We only elect 1 congressman. We only elect 1 U.S. senator. But this person could totally change the apple cart at the border review and bring incredible changes, which would benefit the public.
Well, look, I know that, as you say, not trying to pick on anybody, but we have to pick on them because they've been picking on the homeowners. And I'm saying this from my perspective, because I want for the voters to know, because we haven't known what's been going on. But as you say, this is the one election in many, many, many elections, that the change of office or the change of officers here can dramatically shift hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue that have been going from all of these communities going to a preferential field. It could cut that flow off immediately, at least stop it from happening, right? It's going to take some time for the ones that have been approved. There's nothing we could do about that. But it could stop this from going forth, and it can stop people like Michael Madigan and Ed Burke from making millions and millions and millions of dollars in fees and commissions by shifting taxes from their clients onto working class people, and in a lot of degree, poor people who are just barely trying to meet their needs, but they're having to subsidize the wealthy lifestyles of people who don't need to be subsidized. I mean, it's crazy when you say it.
Right. Just remember, when we use those names, Burke and Verdoliak, the most powerful alderman up until recently, the most powerful state leader by far. Okay. There's a third name that goes with those. Well, there's actually 2 more names. One is Berrios, but he's gone. And the other is Larry Rogers.
Right.
People don't realize Larry Rogers first got elected in 2004 as an alleged reform candidate. Immediately started in 2004, and ever since, he's got millions of dollars from the likes of the Madigan people and the Burke people and the attorneys that do work before their border review. It's important that people understand this. I'm not saying Madigan's an all bad guy, okay, but he's the kind of politics that I despise. always the favors for for their friends and so forth. Little people pay the fare. Okay, we know the way he does it. We know Burke hopefully is going to jail. At least he was convicted for a very similar thing, using their powerful tax appeals firms to do this work. And all of a sudden in
who
2004,
somehow, who somehow, by the way, has saved his law license. I just read an article that he is going to retain his law license because 4 of the Illinois State Supreme Court justices recused themselves from hearing his case. I mean,
he
it
accused
doesn't get it
themselves because they had to. But we should remember that word recuse because we want to talk
right.
about that later. Because
Hmm.
not only is it bad what the Board of Review's been doing, except for the reformer Samantha,
Hmm.
because taking all this money from these people, like the Bears, okay? Whether I love the Bears, okay? I don't know whether I want them to us to have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to finance a new stadium for them. But
Right.
there's a good example. It was a 2-1 vote. If there had been like this Rita Tucker and she happened to agree with Samantha Steele, we wouldn't have that.
Right.
So anyway, I was just making the point about the Madigan stuff that all of a
So
sudden,
it was a 2-1 vote to give the Bears a $10 million reduction in their taxes that we now have to pay.
yeah, in other words, the assessor, Fritz Kagi, had cut that more.
Hmm.
Okay. And when this first happened, of course, I'm have to admit, being in politics so long, I get a little, a little suspicious sometimes. But then about a month ago, when it's a critical political time, it was announced that Rogers wasn't going to go along with that, or Larry
Hmm.
Rogers Jr.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And a couple of weeks later now, this deal is cut with the only no vote being Samantha Steele, in which they are now giving them this, remember, $10 million may not sound like a whole lot to you, but remember when you start adding up all these various homeowners, they got to make that up. So
Yes.
maybe it's only $50 on everybody or $60, but that's where we start getting. But remember that $700 figure I mentioned?
Hmm.
And you start taking the Trump Tower and some of these other buildings and deals that we all know are bad for us. But let me just finish the Madigan point if I could, because it's important when you have a stealth organization. Nobody understands it. They don't know what it is. As you pointed out in your show recently, they only meet once a year. I mean, officially as board members. They ignore anybody they don't like Samantha Steele. They won't even let her get information and so forth. But it's important to understand that from day one, Madigan was critical. So all of a sudden, you have 20, 30 checks showing up, all from top Madigan assistants, okay? All from the
Hmm.
14th Ward. This is not accidental. This is not Joe Blow saying, yeah, I think he's a good guy. I'm going to send him $1,000 or $1,500. This is a coordinated effort, okay? And that's why, we see these commercials being put out for the at least supporting Larisha Tucker, Larry's opponent. And they do make this connection between Trump, Burke, and Madigan.
Hmm.
And that's important. And that's been going on ever since 2004. People don't know that. People don't know. I have plenty of friends that know the father, Larry Rogers, powerful attorney and a big name. And yeah, they give to charity. Well, Burke and Madigan give to charity. Burke and Madigan are both, you might say, talented lawyers. So the key is not whether or not you give to charity because you raise so much money while you're ripping off the public. The key is
Hmm.
what you do in the job, and that's what you were defining earlier. And like I say, I don't want to beat up anybody too much, but there's so much data here. There's so much stuff that smells to high heaven, and hopefully we have time to talk about some of that.
Well, again, it's not beating up on a person. What it is, it's revealing what that person is doing. It's
Exactly.
revealing what that person has been participating in. And
Right.
I want to be clear about that. We're not here to gang up on somebody. Listen, I was a Larry Rogers supporter years ago. He was somebody that I looked to and hoped that would be somebody that had a future in politics, fighting for the community, only to learn that he has just become one of the foot soldiers of old politics here in Chicago. And it's astonishing. And I am very critical of people in particular, anybody who abuses their public office. But I'm in particularly critical of Black people who get into positions of power or positions that they could actually bring some reforms to make things more fair, more equitable in government. It hasn't been a long time that we have had Black people who have been elected into positions to be able to do this. But to get into these positions and then become participants of the same behavior on the very communities that hired you to uh, to work against this sort of thing, and you become complicit with it, it's more egregious. So
It is.
yeah, so we're not going to call it beating up on, we're revealing exactly
Revealing
what is
stuff.
happening.
Right. There's been happening since 2004. This is not new.
Right.
These decisions, I mean, one major decision goes back to 2015. The Inspector General in the county of Cook said, you commissioners of the Board of Review, there's a key point, should not be taking contributions of all the lawyers and others that practice under you. Okay? Because, you spell this out in your shows. What happens is, let's say a typical homeowner is upset because of the valuation they have because they might have to pay more. So they will challenge their taxes. And unfortunately, people believe they have to have lawyers all the time, which they don't. And that starts the process. So then the lawyer's brought in. They often are deals cut, even though they say that's not the case, but we can prove that it is. And then all of a sudden, you may get a little break. Okay, maybe you get $300 savings, but you might pay that lawyer $700 or $800. And then those lawyers in turn give the money to Mr. Rogers or to Barrios when he was there. And that's why I mentioned that 70% of the thousands and thousands, remarkable amounts of money that Larry Rogers brings in is from those attorneys. And they're basically, Larry and his people are in charge of the process, which decides whether or not you get these breaks. I mean, Larry Rogers, he was taking money from the Bears people in January and February. Okay.
To the tune of about $35,000, I believe it was.
That was over a number of years. The most
Yes.
recent checks, I think, are maybe 1,000 in January or December, another 500. So the point is, the IG way back in 2015 had been researching this, complaining about it, and said you should stop doing it. Now, of course, we only have one commissioner that's not doing it now, and that's the Samantha Steele I mentioned. But they said, and you should also recuse yourself. Now, remember that word recuse, if people are not familiar with it, it basically means if you're in a position of politics or power or something like that, and you have a quote conflict of interest, you should say, well, I'm not going to vote. City council has that. They don't always follow it like they should.
Right.
So now in this case, you're an average citizen. Think about it. Okay. If you know that Larry Rogers has been taking all this money, up to maybe $25,000 over a period of years, from people who represent the Bears, okay, and they're coming before you asking for a favor, in a sense, lower our assessments, shouldn't you have to recuse yourself? You shouldn't be taking the money to begin with, in my view. Okay?
Right.
It's flat out corrupt. But if you're going to take a contribution here and there, you shouldn't abuse the contribution, but you should also recuse yourself.
Right.
And they don't do it. They just ignore the Inspector General.
Well, in my conversations with Samantha, and we had an hour-long conversation, which was just absolutely eye-opening in the conversation, even more so than some of the information that I've been able to research and discover what was going on. She tells me that there is absolutely zero oversight at the Board of Review. They make up their own rules. They operate by, there's no standard.
They don't have a manual
operation of
Right.
a manual operation, period. There's no standard of how they do valuations. They just do whatever they want. And in this case, the decision to vote for something goes to the highest bidder. That's what's happening here. So, and Larry Rogers Jr. and George Cardenas vote, lock, step together, because both of them receive these large contributions. I think I read somewhere where Larry Rogers Jr. has received upwards of $800,000, maybe a little bit more, from these tax appeal attorneys, and that's from a small group of tax appeal attorneys that have made contributions to his campaign.
Right. And that's just the last 10 years.
Yes.
Okay, the last 10 years, $800,000. And yeah, there's so many angles to go on this, because you're right, because it really does smell. Now, for example, I was county clerk for a long time. One of the important positions that I had as county clerk was doing elections. And what if I had no rules for elections? Okay. I mean, Chicago had that tradition in the past, of kind of smelly operations. But
Right.
I mean, you have to have rules. You have to have an operating manual, which is a very basic thing. Samantha, one of 3 commissioners, they ignore her. Okay. They simply ignore her, or mistreat her. Okay.
I don't even know that if what they're doing is not borderline or illegal of what they're doing.
Like this at most in other place. First of all, the things that happen in under the border review here in Chicago and Cook County that don't happen in other places. That's an important thing to understand.
Right.
I think some of the figures we talked about is, I think that's like 5% of people who challenge their taxes elsewhere. In Chicago, I don't remember the figures, 35, 45, 55, but an enormously different thing.
Right.
A lot of places you don't have to have lawyers to be involved. So it's a scheme. Okay, we certainly want people to be able to challenge their assessments. No problem with that. Okay, but it should be as easy as possible. And there shouldn't be focusing on, we want everybody to challenge their taxes. Okay, that's just set up to give the people like Rogers and Cardenas all that money, because it's like we said, 800,000 just for Larry in 10 years coming from those attorneys that practiced before them. So anyway, there's things to be done, but as you said earlier, this is not new. It's been going on. The IG has constantly been attacking them. The Board of Ethics has been attacking them. He's been fined. He's had to fire people. Let me give you another example. One of the worst things we would believe about politics in the traditional Cook County, right, is that when you have people that are working for your tax dollars, but they're not doing their job. Okay. That was part of the problem with Madigan stuff too, cutting these deals with Commonwealth Edison, okay, not doing their job. Okay, so Larry Rogers had to fire someone because it was proven that the person was doing political work while he's getting paid by the taxpayers at a high salary, okay, and that was a few years ago. Now, recently, there's another person, okay, and you have to ask yourself, knowing Larry, if you read all of his very expensive, TV ads and so forth. He's got more money than anybody. But, they keep talking about, I hire the best people. There's no conflicts, blah, 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 blah. Well, this person that he's dealing with right now, their job as a top clerk in his office, okay, because each of the 3 commissioners has their people, I think it's around $119,000 a year. $119,000, that's a top position, which means they probably don't get overtime because they're an executive position. So they're working more than just 40 hours a week. And yet at the same time, in 2 months last year, the critical political time when petitions are being gathered and so forth, he got almost $42,000 from Larry Rogers' political campaign. Now, again, I could see, like, let's say maybe somebody was working, streets and sand job, and they did a little work at night to, pass some petitions, and maybe the political groups gave him some money. But this is a top person, okay? We all know that person couldn't earn $42,000 a year while he's working full-time for this job. So it's just, the smell just keeps rising and rising from that operation. But before I depress everybody, because I don't want to, this is a chance, as you said earlier. This could all be changed by one simple vote.
It is, folks, this is the biggest. Every election and every office is important. This is the most critical office that we are going to decide on March 19th, because in Cook County and in Chicago, our elections, especially our statewide elections, are largely decided at the primary. What happens on March 19th is going to be the answer definitive in November. So we have to go to the polls March 19th. If you're early voting, vote for Larisha Tucker for the Board of Review. Vote for change if you want to see dramatic change. We could see dramatic change in what is happening, that hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing out of our communities. We can plug that hole. We can plug that up by voting for a different person by the name of Larissa Tucker on March 19th. That's what we can decide.
And we should say something. I mean, we're not just looking for anybody to be out there in opposition. Let us point out quickly, Larisha Tucker, for example, she's an Army veteran, served for most of her year, been in this area for a long time with her family. She is very qualified. She's been working in the assessor and clerk's office in the suburbs for a long time. She's also experienced in property evaluations, which is part of the work they do. So first of all, she's qualified, okay, because the work she's been doing. Second, she's already pledged, like Samantha Steele is doing, unlike Rogers and unlike Cardenas. She said she will not take any money from the attorneys and others that practiced before her. Okay, very important. Like I said, because how do you, should you be taking money from the Bears organization when you're deciding to give them $10 million at a pop, that kind of thing? So, and again, it's a tough thing because she decided to run after the party already endorsed. Okay. So in this case, the Cook County Democratic Party's endorsed Mr. Rogers. They always like to do things really early. I don't like that because it gets, they're doing their picking around the June before the next year's March election. So anyway, she's a very qualified person. She's got most of the reformers around on her side. She's got several, particularly African-American local officials who've worked in the south suburbs on the same issues. Anyway, so, but it's kind of like, going up against Goliath because of all this money. It's not, and she doesn't have that kind of money. But she's a qualified person, and she's already been talking. And what she says when you talk to her is she talks about fairness. And again, there may be mistakes that Fritz Kagi makes as assessor. Okay, you can't deal with this much property without making a mistake, and these are tough decisions sometimes. How much do we give a break because there's less people working in the downtown office than there were 3 years ago? Okay, those are tough decisions, and that's why we have a board of review, so one could have this process. But remember, this whole scheme was milked by Burke and Verdoliak and others for so long. Remember, all those years that, remember, Barrios came from the board of review, Joe Barrios. Then he became assessor, left with a very bad reputation, left with the reputation of cutting all these deals to help the fat cats downtown and doing all the things that are illegal. You're not allowed to be able to hire in relatives. He did that. He even hired relatives for Larry Rogers, put his relatives on Larry Rogers' staff. So all that kind of good old-fashioned machine hack stuff, okay, which costs the taxpayers. I wouldn't make as much noise if I wasn't worried, because all that costs the taxpayers. Everything like that does. So anyway, we've got a very qualified person. It's not like somebody that's not experienced or talented. And as we said earlier, since there's only 3 commissioners, I mean, Supreme Court, very important. We've got some really good people running for that. Congress, very important. But it's 435 congressmen. There's 50 U.S. senators. And in this case, those other offices, of course, are important. But in this case, because of the 2-to-1 battle right now, a victory for Larisha Tucker would allow many of these changes to take place. That we could go into so many other things that I hate. Well, I shouldn't feel bad because we're trying to divulge the truth here. But time after time, every reform I can think of, okay, is being blocked by Larry Rogers. Okay, and I've only mentioned a few so far.
Right. Well, look, yeah, I want you to cleanse yourself of feeling bad about that, because when we are revealing the truth about what is happening, and it's a negative thing that's happening to thousands of people, right? So that we have to tell the truth about. We cannot, look, Larry Rogers Jr. may be a nice guy. It's hard for me to say that, knowing that he is willfully behaving and engaging in politics for the benefit of a few people, and Then he goes out into the communities and have these so-called community awareness meetings, as though he's doing a good thing by supposedly showing homeowners how they can appeal their taxes, only to come back and saddle them with additional taxes on behalf of people who can afford to pay their own taxes and who should be paying their fair share. This is unconscionable. This is unconscionable, inexcusable, and that person needs to be revealed and exposed. And that person should not be in public office because they're not serving the public.
And think about this just for a moment, because the traditional board of review commissioners always brag about how many of these hearings and stuff they have.
Mhm.
Okay. But what they're really doing, okay, first of all, we shouldn't be having this conflict. No, one of the problems with the board of review is they've intentionally, again, under Larry's leadership, have not connected their technical capabilities with the county. Now, let me explain what that means. Is that so they have outdated technology intentionally? Because if you have the same data, everybody should know. This is more transparent in other places. You know how you make these decisions, and so the information the assessor has should be relatively the same as the information that the board of review has. Okay, there shouldn't be surprises, because the key to this is predictability and accountability, right? But we don't have that because we don't even have a basic operating manual of here's the issues we're going to deal with. Would they, if they weren't getting money from all these attorneys, $800,000 in 10 years, and that's only part of it. Okay, There's a lot of other money that we're not talking about right now. But if they weren't getting that, would they be as excited about having all these meetings?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It shows the good intention. Oh, we're doing all these things. We have all these hearings. We have all these meetings because we want everybody in the world to challenge the evaluations done like by the assessor.
Mm-hmm. Well, but they don't even have that many meetings. Then talking about meetings, I
meetings in the neighborhood stuff. No, they only have the one meeting a year, which is nuts. But what I'm saying is they brag about us. They have these, what they call their community meetings, where they're going out and basically drum up business. Now, and again, I don't have a problem with someone saying, if you really think you're being cheated, here's the way you can do something about it. Exactly. I'm just saying, realistically, with these people, the way we know them, the barriers of the world, would they be having all these meetings? Okay, if it wasn't, the really key behind it is all those people that file charges, the vast majority of them are going to hire lawyers, and those lawyers all give money back to Rogers and Cardenas.
They voted. Larry Rogers and Cardenas voted to require commercial property owners to hire a lawyer.
Right.
I mean, they are complicit with setting the scheme up.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Again,
in public office.
Right. And Cardenas maybe new to it, but he just jumped into this like a traditional machine politician jumped into a money-making enterprise.
Yeah, well, he was probably given a good orientation as to this is how it operates here. And maybe, I'm just, throwing out a real hypothetical. Maybe he went in thinking that he could be a reformer. Maybe. I don't know. I doubt it. But so therefore, they went in and they orientated him to say, this is how we do it here. We run our own show here. We don't answer to anybody. Nobody has provided us a standard of operations. We make up our own rules. We do it the way that we want to do. And this is a good old boys network. And this is how we operate. This is how you make it here. We run it like we run it. Nobody can tell us what to do.
Let me tell you one more thing, because, the people that I have to deal with are saying, well, David, you're being too hard or whatever, blah, blah. Let me tell you one more thing what I'm trying to get to is the politics behind this, so people see the real motives.
Right.
Okay. I was there with Harold Washington. Harold and I worked together way back in city council to pass a law. And then I did the same thing when I was in the county around 1994. And both of those laws that affect Chicago and Cook County say there has to be a limit on how much money that people who do business, the vendors for the city and county how much they can give. It was a big reform, important, needs to have some improvements made. But at that time, it was $1,500. Okay, I would have
Right.
liked less. In fact, I wish they couldn't give because
Mhm.
that's where all the little shady deals come. That's where Burke, remember, is can threaten these little Burger King types because if you don't get the permit right or this permit, you may not be able to function. So I'm trying to remember where to take this right now, but in this particular case, Barrios had got beaten up for years because he was taking more than was supposed to. And the Board of Ethics was after him, the IG. They finally said, you've got to give the money back. Now, Rogers had done the same thing. And so Barrios had to give the money back when he was assessor, and Rogers was on the Board of Review. But here's the thing that Larry did, okay? Before he gave the money back, he created a special PAC, which he was the person in charge of. And then what happened? So all these people who had given too much, like so instead of giving $1,500, they broke the law and gave $2,500. Now people make mistakes. I remember
Mhm.
sometimes getting a notice from the Board of Ethics, Mr. Rohr, you got $1,800 from an organization that could only give $1,500, and that was a nice service they do. And then you give the money back, the part that was too extreme, because how would I know all the
Mhm.
thousands of vendors? Okay,
Right.
but what Larry did, okay, knowingly, he waited until after he was going to force to give the money back. Then he set up a PAC and asked all these same vendors just to send extra money to his PAC. Now, if that doesn't smell in
Yeah.
anybody's vocabulary, I don't know what's wrong.
Well, they were able to do that because nobody was paying attention.
Right.
Nobody was paying attention, or well, I would say the voters weren't paying attention because uh, we largely thought that we were not being impacted by this office. We didn't know what the heck the office did. Board of Review. What do
In
they
the
review? Right? We didn't know that they make real financial decisions that impact the public.
part of it, though, remember, um, in politics, we see that at the national level a lot today too. You have people that may not know, and then you have people like the county board commissioners. Okay, there's very few of those county board commissioners or the county board president or other people that don't know what's really going on.
Right.
What I'm saying is there's choices made to let it go. Don't upset
Yes.
the apple cart. Go along, play along, blah blah blah. And because remember, Burke and Madigan were not the only ones doing this.
Mhm.
Other important politicals were doing this. But yeah, so I use that again because what kind of a person would do that when they only did it because they finally had to return the money, and then they go around and kind of laugh at everybody, almost making faces at all the authorities. Now I'm just going to go back to these same people who I just gave this money back, and now I'm going to have them give me the money back that you can't touch because we're going to call it a campaign contribution to my new PAC.
Right.
Okay, I'm saying I'm trying to point out things that you can say, well, Ed Burke or Larry Rogers, they've given money to charities and blah blah blah. Yes, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is
I think that's important, David. But I think what's more important to the average voter, which is the average homeowner,
right.
what's important to them is how this hits their pocket, right? Because, the average voter will say, well, look, they're all doing it. They're all getting campaign contributions, right? But there, it's hard to pick out something that's happening in government because all of what happens in government has some impact to your life. It has an impact where sometimes it's more subtle. This is not subtle. This is in black and white as it gets as to what a person in public office, a decision that they make that directly impacts your pocket. Decisions that Larry Rogers Jr. makes every time he casts the vote directly impacts the pockets of the average homeowner. The giving hundreds of millions of dollars in tax cut to rich commercial property owners impacts my pocket and every homeowner in the third district, going all the way back to the state lines to Indiana,
Right.
that you have to pay
Right.
a share of that tax deduction given to that rich property owner on your tax bill. We're subsidizing their taxes.
The best estimate is about $700 for every one of those little homeowners that they're paying that they shouldn't be, and in some cases up to 1,000.
Well, I found in 2021 and let me just, I'm going to show you what I found just in the little research when I found out that this was going on. Let me just give you an example of this. I mean, this was astonishing to me, absolutely astonishing to me. And then could go back onto the website, and we can send people there to see it. But I'm trying to find where my notes are here. Wouldn't you know it? You can't find it when you really need it. But hold on, folks. I want to make sure that
Okay.
you see, get this. Okay, here it is. So here is an example of what we're talking about, right? Here's an example of what we're talking about in terms of that $700, right? I think this is, all right. So this is it here, right? So in the reassessment of Chicago in 2021, the Board of Review shifted 7 percentage points of the city's $8 billion levy burden onto homeowners by cutting the values on the largest property owners in the city, which was more than $500 million a year, cut across 800,000 homes, which averaged about $700. That goes back to what you were talking about.
Right.
This is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
This is what we're talking about.
Money's coming out of the pockets of average homeowners, so these deals can be made, and it's all kind of covered up by, oh, we're just trying to help people challenge the assessments and then maybe help them with their taxes. And so when you get to this level and you find out that, no offense, but so Larry Rogers Jr. has been kind of a, tied in with Berrios and Burke for all this time, taking all this money from the attorneys. And by the way, one other thing to keep important, because Larry is finally a little worried about this race now, and he's taking a lot of his own money because he's very wealthy. But remember, all the money that Larry Rogers is spending out of his own money, okay, to win this election for himself, he's all doing it by loans. He's done this before. So the point is, he will get all that money back if he wins.
So he's lending the money.
He's lending
his money to himself to run this campaign, right?
That's
Listen,
right.
I have a home out in Glenview, Illinois that we're redeveloping. Larry Rogers Jr. He has his placards all over the place, like I've never seen before. All over the place, going as far north as you can get to whatever that wherever the lines go to, going all the way back south. But here it is again. He's lending money to himself. He's lending the money that he has earned from his law firm for his law practice,
or from these lawyers,
from his lawyers, from cases that were referred to them by tax appeal attorneys who go before them, that they vote in favor of their appeals. And so it is a recycling of money between this. It's almost gangster-like, right? It's almost gangster-like. It is gangster-like that of what they're doing. So he's loaning this money to himself because he wants to stay in this obscure position that has a lot of power to shift a lot of money to his private firm. That's what this is all about, people. On March 19th, send Larry Rogers Jr. back to his private practice. He can make all the money that he wants in his private practice. I don't knock anybody for doing it, but don't use the public's office and don't take advantage of the public to enrich yourself this way. I mean, there's not a more clearer picture. There's not a more clearer picture. Of course, Ed Burke and Michael Madigan, we knew what they were doing. but you couldn't see it as clearly as we see what is happening here
Uh,
at the
And we
Board
had,
of Review.
right, and we had weak things. For example, one of the good things that former Mayor Lori Lightfoot did is that all these years we had these conflicts of interest, just like we're talking about now. Okay, more obvious because it's a city council, and so Ed Burke, all that time that he was chairman of the finance committee, he was representing American Airlines or United Airlines or this or that. Flat out, nobody does that in the country. It's a flat out conflict with your fiduciary responsibility as an elected official.
Mhm.
Okay. And so that's one of the things that caught Burke up finally. Okay. Because he was busy trying to lean on that little Burger King or whoever it was
Right.
guy to make
Mhm.
him hire his law firm for these appeals. Okay. So petty. And again, anybody that's naive, if it's not too naive, understands if he was doing that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what do you think he's been doing all these
40
days?
years.
Okay. So the point is, but it's conflict of interest. And these are things when the city or the county has weak ethics legislation, that's what people can get away with. And what we're saying, and that's why the IG, the Inspector General, said you should not take that money. You should just stop it. The county commissioners could have stopped them from doing it. The basic said, no, you shouldn't do that. Now, fortunately, we have one commissioner who's not doing it. We have an assessor who is not doing it. And we have a candidate for this opening. There's only one board of review seat up. Okay.
Right.
And one candidate says they're not going to take the money. The other says, I'm going to take it welcomingly.
Right.
So
This is the third district. This is the third district that largely represents the south side of Chicago and the south suburbs, going all the way back out to the state lines.
right.
So we have to vote in some parts of the West Loop and the West Side, but largely the South, Southwest, Southeast, and southern suburbs. We are the ones who are footing this bill. Imagine if that $500,000, I'm sorry, that 500 million, $500 million stayed in our communities. That's a tremendous amount of money that we could use for schools, for roads, for parks, for economic development in our own communities. But we are $500 million that the votes of Larry Rogers Jr. sending out of our communities to subsidize someone else's private interest.
The Trumps of the world. Yes. Right.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We have to stop this.
Yeah.
What else do we got on that we need to know about that we can share, David, in this last few minutes that we
I
have?
don't know. I feel like I've covered I wrote an article that didn't get covered, and I think didn't get covered in the newspaper like I hoped. We talked about the Madigan and all the connection there. We talked about Larry immediately teamed up with Joe Barrios and argued that the nepotism ban didn't apply to him.
Right.
And we've seen that problem. He also had a scandal associated with his half brother, Fred Everly. And again, here's a fascinating thing. Again, if you really understand human nature, you don't have to be a politician to understand this. But what Mr. Rogers will say is, well, Larry Rogers, don't make the decisions. My staff makes those decisions. Okay, they decide whether or not the Bears or somebody else is going to get all these breaks.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
But just think of that, knowing all the scandals in the office, the patronage hire, the relatives hiring, the people have gone to jail already. A number have already been indicted and convicted. Knowing all
And the
that,
people who are getting hired, the people in their staff are people who have no qualifications for doing valuations, have no real estate background whatsoever. So a lot of the people in their offices are not even qualified to make these decisions.
right.
So,
but the out is basically what Mr. Rogers is saying. Well, I don't make these decisions; they do. And if anybody believes that nobody pays attention, for example, that they don't know which of these major attorneys is dropping big sums of money, the tune of $800,000 to
right.
Rogers, you think they don't know this? This is a highly select number of people that work, for Mr. Rogers. Some work for Mr. Cardenas, some work for Samantha Steele. But to think those people don't have a clue what's going on, never read the papers, never heard of Mike Madigan or Ed Burke. It's like, if you're that naive, you don't belong in a position of governmental trust.
Yeah. Well, so what we learned here is that they pick their staff, and many of them pick them staff like aldermen pick their staff. Aldermen pick their staff. They're hiring their cousin, their niece, or somebody who have no governmental background, who have no expertise in terms of government whatsoever. Just somebody that they hire to give a job because they've been elected as an alderman and they have a budget and they could put some people to work, but they don't have any real expertise in doing the work. This is what is being discovered here, that many of these people don't have the qualifications to do it. In my conversations with Samantha Steele, many of the people in these offices don't have the qualifications to do it. Even Larry Rogers Jr. does not have the qualifications to do it. So, and he's been there almost 2 decades. And she says that she does not even have access to the software systems.
But sometimes they've even though she's got expert to work on it, yeah, they've blocked her from that because again, it's not fairly run, and also there's a lot of sexism. By the way,
yes,
there's been a lot of mistreatment of women, and this whole thing about the way they treat Samantha Steele, like should be somebody's secretary and not making any noise. But let me say, to the benefit of the aldermen that I think are really good.
Mm-hmm.
There are aldermen that don't do that. The aldermen hire good people, talented people. So
that's
again, just so we
yeah,
give them a little credit for those who do
that's some of them do that, but they're you know, and I use that because there are some that I know of who past aldermen who have done that sort of thing. But again, you know, in these closing moments here, I cannot reiterate. I'm going to be having this conversation again a little bit later on in the podcast tonight with Charles Thomas at 7:00 for our 7:00 edition of the People Show. But you know, we're going to do a couple more of these, David. I'm going to ask you to come back to do a couple more of these leading up to the election, because we have to let people know. We have to inform people of you. We have a moment in time where we can make a decision to change how we are being taxed. Our communities are being taxed. And if you're okay with paying and subsidizing somebody else's taxes, you know, wealthy person taxes, I guess you'll keep the person in place. If you don't want to pay somebody else's taxes and you want the system to be more fair, then we need to make a change.
Right.
We have the opportunity to do it. This is the most critical local office right now. All that I can to try and make people aware of what's going on. I need your help to do that. All right. Listen, David, thanks so much for coming in. This has been great. We're going to have to do it again. We're going to be talking about it, folks, a little bit later on tonight at 7:00. Make sure you tune back in for our Monday night, a regular edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. I can never get that right. And we'll be right back here a little bit later on. David, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
All right. Okay, folks, we'll see you later on tonight. Take care.